Welcome, dear listener, to a journey through the timeless tales of Greek mythology. Tonight we explore the story of Altheon, a mortal who faced the trials of the gods, the dangers of ambition, and the quiet, persistent shadow of hubris, the pride that can rise in every human heart. This is a story of courage, reflection, and the profound consequences of our choices, a story to drift into, to dream with, and to awaken from with new understanding. Before we begin, take a deep breath, settle into a comfortable place, and let the world around you fade. And if you enjoy these long, immersive journeys through mythology, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you never miss a story. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what lesson from this tale resonates with you the most, or which Greek myth you'd like us to explore next. Now let us begin the story of Altheon and the enduring lesson of hubris and humility. Long ago, in a land bathed in golden sunlight and caressed by gentle winds, there lived a man named Altheon. He was neither king nor prophet, yet from the earliest days of his life, it seemed the fates themselves had woven greatness into his being. Altheon's childhood was unlike that of ordinary mortals. While other children played with sticks or chased after animals in the fields, Altheon would sit for hours carving figures from stone and wood, shaping the smallest details with a precision that astonished even the village elders. Birds would pause mid-flight, as if caught in awe when he whistled, and his songs carried an almost magical cadence, softening the hearts of even the sternest villagers. From the beginning there was an air about him that was neither humble nor cruel, but quietly extraordinary. Yet in quiet greatness, pride often finds its first seed, and in Altheon the seed grew silently. He began to notice that his talents earned him admiration not only from peers, but from strangers who journeyed from faraway lands just to witness the marvel of his creations. At first, he accepted their praise with modesty, but slowly a subtle flame of arrogance took root. It whispered in his ear during quiet nights, "You are not like them. You are destined for more." The fates, who spin the thread of every mortal life, observed this with gentle patience. They are not quick to punish, but they mark the beginnings of hubris with keen attention. The gods, too, noticed Altheon's growing pride. Athena, wise and discerning, watched him with a mixture of curiosity and forewarning. Hermes sent whispers in the wind, subtle signs woven into dreams, omens that hinted at the dangers ahead, a sculpture collapsing without reason, a song faltering mid-note, a reflection in still water that seemed to mock him. Yet Altheon, in the bloom of youth and talent, did not understand these subtle warnings. He was certain of his power, certain that he could shape the world to his will. As he grew, so did his ambition. He sought out challenges that tested the limits of mortals. He raced the swiftest horses, solved riddles that had stumped elders for decades, and sculpted statues so lifelike that villagers whispered they might step down from their pedestals at night. And with every success, the flame of hubris flickered brighter, feeding on his growing certainty that no mortal or god could rival him. At night, he would gaze into the still pools of water, watching his reflection and whispering, "I am stronger than fate itself. I am wiser than the gods who watch from above." The villagers noticed the change. Those who once admired him in quiet awe now whispered behind his back, murmuring warnings to each other. "Pride grows too fast," they said. "The gods do not favor the arrogant." But Altheon was deaf to caution. In his heart, he believed that fate itself was a servant meant to bend to his will. Every compliment, every bow of respect confirmed his belief that he was destined to surpass not only mortals, but the very immortals themselves. It was during the festival of Helios, when the sun blazed high in the sky and cast golden light over the olive groves and cobbled streets, that Altheon's pride reached its first great climax. He unveiled a statue unlike anything the world had ever seen. Crafted from marble and imbued with such meticulous care that it seemed alive, it depicted a figure standing between men and gods, powerful, serene, unyielding. The villagers gathered in awe, and many fell to their knees before the magnificence of his work. Altheon stood tall, basking in their admiration, and for a brief moment the world seemed to pause, holding its breath at the sight of human brilliance. But then he spoke, and the words dripped with a quiet arrogance that would echo through history. "This is but a glimpse of what I am capable of. The gods themselves cannot rival my hand, my mind, or my strength. I shall rise beyond their heights. Olympus will remember my name long after their thrones crumble." Soft murmurs spread through the crowd. Some feared him, others were awed, but all sensed the shadow of hubris that had begun to cloak his brilliance. Yet Altheon did not notice. The fates are patient, and the gods even more so. Rather than strike him down immediately, they chose subtlety. Athena sent quiet dreams, showing Altheon the possible futures shaped by his pride. Cities crumbling, friends weeping, storms that consumed everything he loved. Hermes whispered warnings in the wind, teasing him with glimpses of ruin, yet Altheon laughed them off. "These are but shadows," he said. "I shape my destiny, and no god, no fate will command me." He began to test the boundaries of mortals. He climbed the highest peaks, seeking winds that no man had ever felt. He sculpted the clouds into forms that mocked the gods themselves. He challenged the seas, daring them to obey his commands. Every act, every defiance was a song of pride, and the more he defied, the more the gods watched, intrigued and wary. Zeus, in particular, observed silently a storm brewing behind his calm gaze. At night, when the village slept and the stars blinked above like ancient eyes, Altheon's dreams became vivid with both triumph and warning. He would see himself standing atop Olympus, laughing with the gods, yet shadows lurked at the edges of his vision, whispering that pride is a flame that consumes even the brightest soul. Yet he ignored them, thinking himself untouchable, a mortal destined to challenge divinity itself. One day, Altheon dared something even more audacious. He climbed the tallest mountain where the winds screamed like titans, where lightning danced upon jagged peaks, and where mortals were not meant to tread. He sought to capture the essence of Zeus's own lightning, to mold it into a crown that would symbolize his triumph over the divine. For hours he labored, ignoring the warnings etched in his visions. The wind seemed to bend around him, the clouds parted, and lightning paused as though curious about the mortal who dared such ambition. For a brief, shining moment it seemed he might succeed. His hands, skilled and determined, reached for the heavens themselves, and the world held its breath. But hubris, the ancients had long warned, is a weight heavier than any crown. And in the blink of an eye the consequences of arrogance fell upon him. Zeus unleashed a bolt not born of anger, but of perfect justice. It shattered the crown, tore through the mountain, and cast Altheon down into darkness. When he awoke, he was no longer the man he had been. His strength had waned, his voice faltered, and the admiration of his peers had turned to fear and pity. He wandered through his village, seeing the fear in the eyes of those he once inspired. Friends turned away, families trembled at his presence, and the creations he had once molded with care lay broken and scattered. And yet the greatest punishment was not physical. It was the slow, aching clarity that settled into his heart. He saw the ruin his pride had sown, the lives he had endangered, and the fleeting nature of mortal greatness. The fates, who weave life with both cruelty and mercy, had shown him that no mortal may rival the divine without paying the price. From that day forward, Altheon became a wandering teacher, sharing the lessons of humility and moderation. He spoke softly of the dangers of pride, of the quiet power of restraint, and of the wisdom that comes from knowing one's place in the tapestry of life. Though he would never reclaim his former glory, his story became a whisper carried on the wind, a lesson for all who would listen. And so, as the stars blinked gently above and the olive trees swayed in the evening breeze, the tale of Altheon's hubris became a timeless warning. Pride, the Greeks taught, may tempt even the brightest soul, yet humility is the steady light that guides mortals through the storms of life. And in the quiet of night, if one listens carefully, one may hear the soft whispers of the gods themselves, reminding all who wander, respect the boundaries of fate, for hubris casts shadows longer than the tallest mountain. Altheon wandered through the lands, his mind heavy with the weight of what he had lost. The once vibrant joy he had carried in his chest now felt like a fragile ember, struggling against a cold wind. His hands, though still skilled, no longer shaped the world with the same effortless grace. Each step he took reminded him of the mountain, the lightning, and the power he had dared to command. He thought often of the villagers who had once praised him, now avoiding his gaze, speaking in hushed tones as he passed. The admiration that had once fed his pride now lingered as a bitter echo, a reminder of the fragility of mortal fame. Yet, in the quiet of his wandering, Altheon began to notice subtler beauties in the world. The wind whispered differently now, not as a force to challenge, but as a companion in reflection. The river that flowed past his feet carried stories in its ripples, stories of lives both humble and grand, all shaped by the unseen hand of fate. Altheon came to understand that the gods, though mighty and unknowable, were also stewards of lessons, gentle yet firm in their guidance. It was a revelation that came slowly, like dawn creeping over the horizon, and he clung to it as a fragile hope. His journey took him to distant lands where mountains rose like the spines of sleeping titans and valleys shimmered with pools that reflected both the sky and the heart of the wanderer. Here he met sages who spoke in riddles, each word a mirror to the soul, each pause a breath of insight. They listened to his story with patience and silence, nodding at the moments when he spoke of pride, of ambition, of the lightning that had humbled him. "You have seen the shadow of hubris," one old sage said, his eyes bright beneath heavy brows. "Few mortals are shown so clearly, few survive to learn its lesson fully." Altheon's nights were haunted by visions, not of lightning and ruin this time, but of possibilities and regrets. He would see his younger self, eager and fearless, shaping marble with hands untouched by failure, speaking to the crowd with a voice full of conviction. And then, as if a veil had been drawn, he would watch that same self stumble, pride swelling like a wave until it drowned him in a storm of his own making. These dreams were neither cruel nor forgiving. They were mirrors, reflecting the truth that mortals must confront. The higher the ambition, the sharper the fall. In one quiet village by the sea, Altheon paused to rest. The salt air mixed with the scent of olive trees and wildflowers, calming the ache in his chest. Children played along the shore, building towers of sand, their laughter light and free. He watched them, and in their simplicity he found a fragment of the peace he had once sought in greatness. It was here that he realized humility was not weakness. It was not the absence of ambition, but the presence of understanding, an awareness that power, talent, and knowledge are gifts meant to be tempered with care. Yet, even in his newfound clarity, Altheon's mind could not escape the lingering shadows of desire. He still felt the pull of greatness, the temptation to rise above mortality once more, if only to prove that his fall had not defined him. And in this tension, the gods observed quietly. Athena, who had first noted his pride, smiled at the subtle transformation unfolding within him. Zeus, ever vigilant, allowed the mortal time to reflect, knowing that wisdom must often be learned through patience and experience. The path of hubris was treacherous, but the path of understanding required courage of another kind, the courage to face one's own imperfections. One evening, as the sun sank into the horizon, painting the sky in hues of rose and amber, Altheon came upon a grove unlike any he had seen. Trees twisted gracefully toward the heavens, their leaves shimmering with an inner light, as though the grove itself breathed with a quiet intelligence. In the center stood an ancient stone altar worn by centuries, its surface etched with symbols that pulsed faintly with the memory of forgotten rituals. Drawn by a force he could not name, Altheon approached, feeling both awe and trepidation. He knelt before the altar and whispered a prayer, not for power nor for glory, but for understanding, for the strength to accept his place within the grand tapestry of life. As night fell, the stars emerged one by one, their light spilling like silver across the world. Altheon felt a presence, gentle yet commanding, as though the very heavens had leaned down to listen. In that moment he understood a truth that had eluded him in youth. Hubris is not merely the arrogance to challenge the divine, it is the blindness to one's own limitations, the refusal to see that the world is shaped by forces greater than any single hand. And in this understanding, he felt the first true spark of peace since the mountain had cast him down. Yet life, as the fates weave it, is seldom so simple. Altheon would soon encounter trials that tested not only his humility, but his resolve. For the lessons of hubris are not learned in solitude or reflection alone. They are etched through experience, through encounters with the world that demand both courage and wisdom. And as he continued along the winding paths of his journey, he sensed that the gods were not finished with him, that each step carried the weight of unseen eyes and the possibility of revelation. The road ahead was long, fraught with both danger and insight. Altheon, though humbled, did not despair. He walked with quiet determination, carrying the lessons of his past like a lantern to guide his way. And with each breath of wind, each ripple of river, each whisper of the night, he felt the presence of forces larger than himself, not to punish, but to teach, to guide and to remind that the measure of a mortal is not in the heights they reach, but in the grace with which they accept the limits of their existence. Altheon travelled onward, his path winding through hills and valleys where the wind sang through the olive groves like a living hymn. Though humbled, a quiet restlessness lingered in his chest, a memory of the fire that had once fueled his pride. It was a subtle ache, not the arrogance of youth, but a reminder of the mortal longing for significance, for legacy. He understood now that greatness was not measured solely by what one could do, but by how one bore the consequences of one's actions. And yet, even this understanding was tested by the world around him, which seemed eager to present both temptation and trial. In a village at the edge of a wide, sun-dappled plain, Altheon encountered a contest unlike any he had known. The villagers had gathered to see feats of skill, races of speed, displays of strength, contests of wit. The champions of surrounding towns had arrived, bringing pride in the form of polished arms, finely crafted chariots, and minds sharpened by strategy. For a moment, Altheon felt the old stirrings within him, the urge to prove, to surpass, to rise once more. But this time he hesitated. He watched the young competitors, noting the joy in their eyes, the fierce yet playful determination that had once burned in him before hubris had darkened the flame. It was here that Altheon first encountered the subtle lessons of humility in practice. He joined a race, not to dominate, but to walk among them, to feel what it meant to strive without the weight of expectation pressing down upon him. He raced and stumbled, laughed at his own missteps and offered encouragement to others, marveling at their accomplishments without envy. He began to realize that admiration and success were fleeting, but connection, compassion, and shared effort carried a weight far greater than personal glory. Yet the gods, who never act without purpose, decided to remind him that the lessons of hubris are not learned in moments of ease. One evening, as the village celebrated the close of the contests with music and dance, a sudden storm swept across the plains. The wind tore through tents, lightning split trees, and the villagers scrambled for safety. Altheon felt the tremor of old fear stirring, memories of the mountain and the bolt of Zeus flashing through his mind. Without thought for pride or recognition, he sprang into action, guiding the frightened villagers to safety, calming children with a steady voice and helping elders escape the fury of nature. In those moments of chaos, Altheon discovered a new kind of strength, the strength that comes not from challenging the divine, but from embracing one's responsibility to others. It was a quiet triumph, unseen by the heavens yet felt deeply in his own heart. As the storm passed, leaving the plains glistening under a silver moon, the villagers looked upon him not as a god or a hero, but as one of their own, touched by both skill and compassion. Altheon realized that the measure of greatness lay not in the defiance of limits, but in the humility to serve, to act wisely, and to recognize that life was not a solitary ascent, but a shared journey. From that night forward, Altheon's path took on a rhythm of reflection and action. He wandered through forests where the trees whispered secrets older than memory, across rivers that mirrored the sky in gentle waves, and into towns where he could witness the lives of ordinary people, each shaped by small acts of courage, kindness, and wisdom. He observed that the god's influence was subtle, woven into the texture of life itself, guiding mortals toward lessons without the need for thunderbolts or divine wrath. Even so, he never forgot the mountain, the lightning, and the clarity that had come from his fall. It was a reminder that hubris, once ignited, leaves a mark that cannot be erased, only understood. In one quiet valley, Altheon encountered a hermit who lived in a cave near a crystal-clear spring. The hermit's face was weathered by time, his eyes bright with a serenity that only comes from seeing life in all its contradictions. Altheon sat with him, sharing stories of his past, of the heights he had reached, and the fall that had taught him humility. The hermit listened without interruption, nodding thoughtfully, and then spoke in a voice that was both soft and piercing. "Pride blinds the eyes, mortal, yet it also illuminates the path when one learns from its shadow. You have seen what you must avoid, but now the true test is not in avoiding arrogance, but in carrying wisdom forward, so that others may learn without the pain you endured." Altheon absorbed these words like water into parched earth. He understood that humility was not a single act, but a lifetime of mindful choices, of small yet deliberate efforts to balance strength with restraint, ambition with care, and knowledge with empathy. Yet even in this understanding, the pull of greatness lingered, a subtle reminder that humans are creatures of desire, always reaching for what lies just beyond their grasp. One night, as he slept beneath the open sky, Altheon dreamed once more. This dream was different from those of the past. Instead of lightning and ruin, he saw himself standing atop a quiet hill, the wind carrying the songs of those he had helped, the laughter of children, the smiles of those he had guided. And yet, in the shadows at the edge of the vision, he saw a figure cloaked in gold and storm, a reminder of Zeus's gaze and the mountain he had dared to climb. The dream whispered that the lessons of hubris are never truly complete. They echo across time, returning in new forms, in choices yet to be made, in moments when pride threatens to overshadow wisdom. Altheon awoke with a new resolve. He would not seek to rival the gods again, nor would he abandon the longing for significance that burned within him. Instead, he would channel it into acts of service, into learning and teaching, into living a life that honored both human ambition and mortal limitations. And so the wanderer continued, moving from village to village, forest to forest, river to river. He became a quiet legend, not for feats that challenged Olympus, but for the calm, deliberate wisdom he shared, for the lessons he embodied in action and presence. Each encounter, each trial, was a thread in a growing tapestry, a story of caution, reflection, and the delicate balance between ambition and humility. Even as he traveled, Altheon felt the persistent presence of the divine, not as a threat, but as a gentle, guiding force, shaping the world and his path through subtle whispers, fleeting visions, and moments that tested both heart and mind. He had learned that hubris leaves scars but also gifts clarity, and that the measure of a mortal is not in the heights they reach, but in the grace with which they accept the lessons of the fall. Altheon continued his journey across lands both familiar and strange, moving with a quiet determination that carried him far from the villages that had once cheered and feared him. The memory of the mountain, of Zeus's lightning, remained an ever-present shadow in his mind, a cautionary echo of what happens when mortal ambition outruns wisdom. Yet this shadow no longer haunted him with anger or despair. It was a companion of understanding, a reminder that life is a delicate balance between desire and restraint. As he traveled, he observed the rhythm of the natural world, the rise and fall of the sun, the gentle sway of trees, the endless flow of rivers, and he understood that each acted in harmony, neither striving against the other, nor dominating, yet all vital in the orchestration of existence. In these reflections, Altheon found solace and quiet guidance, a lesson in humility written into the world itself. In the valleys, he noticed farmers tending their fields, their hands roughened by toil yet gentle in the care they gave to the soil. He saw shepherds guiding their flocks with patience, their eyes alert to danger yet calm in spirit. He met merchants who traded not only goods but stories and wisdom from distant lands, and scholars who spent their lives unraveling the mysteries of nature and human behavior. And in each encounter, Altheon saw glimpses of himself. The boy who had sought admiration, the man who had dared to challenge the gods, the humbled wanderer learning the quiet power of restraint. Each of these lives, small and ordinary in the eyes of Olympus, held a strength he had once overlooked, a strength that did not demand glory, but endured, gentle and steady, through the passage of time. One afternoon, as the sun burned high and cast long shadows across the plains, Altheon came upon a village perched on the edge of a great forest. The villagers were wary at first, glancing at the stranger with suspicion. Yet his calm demeanor, his unassuming presence, and the subtle wisdom in his words soon drew them in. He helped them repair their homes, taught their children to read the stars and the patterns of the seasons, and shared stories that carried both warning and hope. And as he worked, he began to notice the stirrings of hubris that sometimes crept back into his heart, not the blinding arrogance of youth, but a quiet temptation to measure himself against others, to seek recognition, even subtly, for the guidance he provided. It was here that the gods, ever watchful, chose to test him anew. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of violet and gold, a figure appeared at the edge of the village, cloaked in shadows that shimmered with an otherworldly light. It was Hermes, the messenger, moving with the speed and grace of the wind itself. Altheon, the god spoke, his voice soft, yet carrying an authority that could not be ignored. You have learned much, but the lessons of hubris are never complete. Pride wears many masks, and even in acts of service, the heart can deceive itself. You must see the truth in all things, not only in the deeds of gods, but in the intentions that drive mortal hearts. Altheon bowed his head, understanding the weight of these words. I have walked far, he replied, his voice steady, yet tinged with reverence. I have seen the consequences of pride, and I have sought to serve rather than to command. Yet I know that even now my heart can stray, and I must remain vigilant. Hermes nodded, a faint smile flickering beneath the shadowed hood. Wisdom is a journey without end, Altheon. The gods do not punish only with fire or lightning. Sometimes the greatest lessons are taught through quiet trials, through reflection, and through the subtle testing of character. Be mindful of what stirs within you, for even a humble heart can be tempted by the echo of past glory. The god vanished as silently as he had arrived, leaving Altheon to contemplate the meaning of this encounter. He understood that his journey was not simply a path of penance or learning. It was a continuous shaping of character, a test not only of humility, but of vigilance. As he reflected, the stars began to emerge, one by one, painting the night sky with silver light. Each star seemed to whisper a story, an echo of human striving, divine intervention, and the delicate balance between them. Altheon felt the presence of the fates, their unseen hands weaving the threads of his life with care and precision. He recognized that every choice, every act, carried significance, shaping not only his destiny, but the lives of those around him. In the days that followed, Altheon journeyed deeper into the forest that bordered the village, seeking solitude and reflection. The trees here were ancient, their roots gnarled and deep, their branches reaching toward the sky as though in silent supplication. Birds sang in hidden glades, their melodies carrying a sense of continuity, of life persisting through time. He found a quiet clearing with a small spring, its waters clear and cold, and there he settled for contemplation. The reflection of the sky in the water reminded him of the mountain, of Zeus's lightning, yet now it also reflected a tempered spirit, one that had begun to understand the measure of human ambition. As he meditated beside the spring, visions came again, but unlike the fiery dreams of his past, these were subtle and instructive. He saw himself at different moments in life, tempted by recognition, challenged by the expectations of others, faced with choices that could either lead to pride or humility. Each vision illuminated not only his past missteps, but the potential for wisdom, the paths he could take to guide others and himself without succumbing to the shadow of arrogance. And with each vision, he felt a growing sense of clarity, a deepening understanding that mortal strength is best measured not in conquest or spectacle, but in restraint, empathy, and thoughtful action. Yet the world would not allow him rest for long. One day, a messenger arrived at the village bearing news of a distant city under siege. The people there had suffered famine, disease, and strife, and their leaders were weak, unable to protect them. Altheon knew that he could remain in quiet reflection, content with his solitude, or he could act. And in this choice, he felt the lingering pull of ambition, not the prideful desire to rival gods, but a mortal longing to make a meaningful difference in the lives of others. he chose to go, to travel to the city and lend his guidance, his strength, and his wisdom. The journey was arduous, taking him across rugged mountains, swift rivers, and dense forests. Along the way, he encountered travelers in need, animals caught in peril, and communities on the brink of despair. Each challenge tested not only his physical endurance, but his patience, his empathy, and his resolve to act without seeking personal glory. He came to understand that humility is not passive, it is active, requiring conscious effort, self-awareness, and a willingness to shoulder responsibility for the greater good. When he arrived at the besieged city, he found despair etched into every face. Children wept for food, elders mourned the loss of their kin, and soldiers faltered in the face of adversity. Altheon set aside fear, doubt, and the faint echo of past pride. He organized efforts to distribute aid, guided the construction of protective barriers, and taught strategies to conserve resources and fortify the city against both natural and human threats. His presence did not command awe or demand reverence. Instead, it inspired hope, not through spectacle, but through deliberate, compassionate action. As weeks passed, the city began to recover, slowly, painfully, yet steadily. Altheon observed the transformation not as a triumph of his own making, but as a testament to the resilience of human effort and the quiet guidance of wisdom tempered by experience. He saw that hubris need not arise from pride alone. It could also emerge from impatience, from the desire for immediate recognition, or from underestimating the subtleties of the world. And in this understanding, he found a profound humility, one that did not diminish his spirit but strengthened it, grounding him in the knowledge that mortal actions, while powerful, are but threads in the larger tapestry of life. Night fell, and Altheon stood upon the city walls, gazing at the stars once more. The moon reflected on the quiet streets below, illuminating the faces of those who had endured suffering and now smiled with cautious hope. He felt the presence of the gods, not as wrathful overseers, but as subtle observers, guiding and teaching, reminding him that the balance between pride and humility is delicate, eternal, and ever-shifting. Altheon realized that his journey was far from over. There were still lessons to be learned, challenges to face, and choices that would test the integrity of his spirit. Yet he also understood that he no longer sought glory for its own sake. His ambition, now tempered by wisdom, was to serve, to guide, and to walk the path of mortal life with awareness, care, and reverence for the forces that shape all existence. In the quiet of the night, with the city resting in safety and the wind carrying the faint scent of olive trees and distant seas, Altheon whispered a vow to the unseen heavens, that he would continue his journey not as a man seeking to rival gods, but as one seeking understanding, compassion, and the strength to act wisely. And as he spoke, the stars above seemed to shimmer with recognition, the fates weaving his resolve into the eternal tapestry, a reminder that even those touched by hubris can find redemption, clarity, and a path illuminated by the quiet power of humility. Altheon left the city behind at dawn, the sun rising slowly over the hills and bathing the earth in soft gold. His steps carried him through valleys dotted with wildflowers and along rivers that reflected the early light like liquid silver. Though the city had been saved through his guidance, he understood that true humility is tested not in moments of triumph, but in the quiet choices made after success. Pride has a way of creeping back into the heart, subtle and patient, even when one believes it banished. He moved forward with care, mindful of every thought, every impulse, knowing that the gods observe not only deeds, but intentions. Days turned into weeks as he journeyed farther from familiar lands. He crossed plains where the wind whispered secrets through tall grasses and forests where the sunlight filtered down in golden beams, illuminating paths lined with moss and delicate flowers. Each place seemed alive with subtle magic, and Altheon often paused to listen to the quiet lessons hidden in the natural world. A fallen tree became a bridge, teaching resourcefulness. A frightened animal cornered by a predator revealed the delicate balance of life and survival. Even in these small encounters, he felt the lingering presence of divine observation, reminding him that hubris is not a single act, but a constant challenge to the human heart. It was during one such morning, while walking along a mist-shrouded forest path, that Altheon encountered a stranger. The man was old, with hair like silver threads and eyes deep and piercing, yet not unkind. His robes were simple, and he carried a staff carved with intricate symbols that seemed to pulse with a quiet energy. The old man spoke without preamble, his voice carrying both weight and gentleness. "Altheon," he said, "I have watched your journey. You have learned to temper pride with reflection, to channel ambition into service. Yet your spirit will soon face a test unlike any before. Are you prepared to confront not only the world but yourself?" Altheon paused, sensing that the stranger was no ordinary mortal. "I have learned much," he replied cautiously, "but I do not know what awaits. I only know that I must continue with care and strive to act with wisdom." The old man nodded, and with a gesture of his hand the forest seemed to shift subtly. Paths that had been hidden now lay open, revealing a trail leading deep into the mountains. "Follow this path," he said. "It will challenge every lesson you have learned. Only by confronting the echoes of hubris within you will you truly understand the nature of mortal ambition and divine justice." With measured steps, Altheon followed the path into the mountains. The air grew thinner, colder, carrying the scent of snow and stone. Winds roared through jagged peaks, and shadows stretched across cliffs like dark fingers. He climbed higher, each step testing his endurance, his patience, and his ability to remain composed. Here, in this realm between earth and sky, he felt the weight of both mortal limitation and divine scrutiny. Every gust of wind, every sudden tremor in the rocks, seemed like a reminder of Zeus's lightning, of the mountain that had once humbled him. As he reached a plateau overlooking a vast chasm, the wind ceased suddenly, and an eerie silence settled over the mountains. From the depths of the gorge came a sound, low, rumbling, almost alive. Altheon sensed a presence, ancient and immense, waiting to confront him. And then he saw it, a creature of legend, neither fully mortal nor divine, with eyes like molten gold and wings that stretched wider than any mortal could fathom. It was a guardian sent to test those who walked the line between ambition and humility. Its gaze fixed upon Altheon, and he felt a tremor in his heart, not fear, but the awareness of a trial whose stakes were beyond mortal reckoning. The guardian spoke, its voice echoing through the mountains like rolling thunder. "Altheon, you have traveled far and learned the quiet lessons of reflection. Yet now you must face the consequences of desire untempered by patience. Pride is not only in action but in thought. Tell me, do you still seek to rise above the limits of mortals, or have you embraced the humility that true wisdom demands?" Altheon met the creature's gaze, feeling the weight of its words. For a moment, he felt the old temptation, the yearning to prove himself, to conquer, to rival even the gods. But the mountain, the storms, the lightning, and the trials of the past weeks reminded him of the cost of pride. "I do not seek to rival the gods," he said, his voice steady, "nor do I wish to prove myself beyond the limits set by fate. I seek only to act with wisdom, to guide, to serve, and to walk the path of life with awareness and care. The guardian regarded him for long moments, its eyes probing, as if searching the depths of Altheon's soul. And then, slowly, it nodded. "Words alone cannot prove the heart," it said. "Actions reveal the truth. You will face a challenge that demands every lesson you have learned, every ounce of patience, humility, and courage. Fail, and your pride will consume you anew. Succeed, and you will understand the measure of mortal ambition and the grace of restraint." Without another word, the guardian vanished, leaving Altheon alone on the wind-swept plateau. Below him, the chasm stretched into shadow, a vast emptiness that seemed to breathe with life. And then he heard it, a cry, faint at first, growing louder, the voice of those in need. From the depths of the gorge, smoke and fire rose, and Altheon realized that a village lay in peril, trapped by both natural forces and human error. The challenge was clear. He could ignore the call and preserve his own safety, or he could descend into danger, risking life and strength to act wisely and selflessly. Altheon's heart quickened, yet he did not hesitate. He descended into the gorge, navigating narrow ledges, rushing streams, and jagged rocks with careful precision. The path was treacherous, testing not only his physical skill but his patience and focus. At every turn he felt the whisper of hubris, the desire to move faster, to act with flamboyance, to be seen as a hero. And at every moment he countered it with quiet thoughtfulness, ensuring that each decision served the greater good rather than the ego of the moment. As he reached the village, he saw the full extent of the danger. A landslide had blocked the main path to safety, and the villagers were trapped between falling rocks and rising floodwaters. Altheon organized efforts with calm authority, guiding families to higher ground, forming chains to carry the wounded, and directing the villagers to use natural features to their advantage. He worked tirelessly, not for recognition, but because it was necessary, each action a testament to the lessons he had learned. Hours passed like days in the intensity of the struggle. Altheon's hands were cut and bruised, his body weary, yet his mind remained sharp, mindful of every decision and its consequences. Slowly, the villagers were brought to safety, the threat mitigated through a combination of careful planning and the courage of those he had guided. And when the final family reached higher ground, Altheon allowed himself a deep breath, feeling not pride, but quiet satisfaction in the fulfillment of duty. That night, as the stars emerged over the gorge and the winds whispered through the trees, Altheon sat upon a rock and reflected. The guardian's words returned to him. Actions reveal the heart. In the fire of danger, in the pressure of choice, he had confronted the lingering shadows of pride and emerged not unscathed, but wiser, calmer, tempered. He understood that humility is not the absence of ambition, but the careful channeling of desire, guided by reflection, awareness, and empathy. And as he gazed at the sleeping village, its people now safe, he felt the subtle presence of the gods. Athena's watchful eyes, Zeus's storming power tempered into quiet approval, Hermes's playful whispers in the wind, all were there, not to punish, but to remind that life is a continuous dialogue between mortal effort and divine observation. Altheon realized that his journey was far from complete. There would be further trials, choices that demanded not only skill but wisdom, and moments when the temptation of pride would return. Yet he was prepared now to meet them with the tempered heart of one who had fallen, learned, and risen again in understanding. As the night deepened, Altheon whispered a prayer to the unseen heavens. Not for power, not for recognition, not for the glory of achievement, but for clarity, guidance, and the strength to act wisely in every moment yet to come. And as he spoke, the stars above seemed to shimmer with gentle light, a silent affirmation that the journey of wisdom, though never-ending, is also rich with grace, resilience, and the quiet power of humility. Altheon left the gorge behind, the village he had saved now, quiet under the gentle glow of morning. The people slept peacefully, their lives temporarily restored to balance, yet Altheon knew that peace is fragile, a delicate tapestry easily unraveled by carelessness or ambition. As he walked along the narrow mountain paths, he reflected on the trials he had faced, the landslide, the floodwaters, the ever-present whisper of hubris lurking in the back of his mind. Each challenge had been a test, a mirror reflecting both his growth and the lingering shadows of pride. He understood now that humility is not a static state, but a constant vigilance, a quiet effort to align intention with action, to temper desire with wisdom. The mountains rose taller as he progressed, their peaks hidden in mists that shimmered with silver light. The wind, once merely a companion, now seemed to carry voices, soft, insistent, almost like whispers of the gods themselves. They spoke not with force or command, but with subtlety, guiding, testing, and observing. Altheon moved with care, attentive to every sound, every shift in the earth beneath his feet, every shadow that crossed his path. He knew that the divine presence was near, watching not only what he did, but why he did it. Pride, even the quiet, tempered kind, can lead mortals astray when they least expect it. In a hidden glade, surrounded by ancient oaks and silver-leafed trees, Altheon found himself drawn to a small pool of water, its surface still and reflective. Kneeling beside it, he gazed into the depths and saw visions of his past, moments of ambition, of reckless pride, of defiance against the divine. Each memory flickered like a candle in a dark hall, illuminating the mistakes that had brought him to this path. But within the same reflections he saw his growth, the acts of service, the quiet guidance, the careful attention to humility. It was a stark reminder that life is a constant balance between what has been and what can yet be, and that true wisdom comes not from avoiding mistakes, but from understanding their lessons deeply and carrying them forward with care. As he meditated, a sudden movement caught his eye, a figure emerging from the forest, cloaked in deep green and brown, blending with the shadows. The figure approached silently, and Altheon realized that this was no ordinary mortal. The stranger's presence exuded a quiet authority, a force both gentle and commanding, as if nature itself had taken form. "Altheon," the figure said, voice smooth as flowing water, "you have learned much in service and reflection, yet your journey is not complete. Hubris is a river that flows in unexpected currents, and even those who strive for wisdom can be swept away if they forget the vigilance required of mortal hearts." Altheon rose, attentive and respectful. "I have seen the cost of pride, and I have strived to act with care," he replied. "But I know the lessons are ongoing, and I am prepared to continue learning, to face the trials that will reveal the truth of my intentions." The figure nodded, and with a graceful motion, revealed a path descending into a deep valley shrouded in fog. "There lies a city untouched by your deeds, yet it suffers under forces both human and natural. There you will confront not only danger, but temptation. The choices you make will test every lesson you have learned. The journey to the valley was arduous. The mountains pressed close, cliffs falling sharply to the forested slopes below. The wind tore through narrow passes, and the cold air bit at Altheon's skin, yet he pressed forward with quiet determination. Along the way, he encountered signs of the fragile balance of life, fallen animals struggling to survive, trees uprooted by storms, and small villages isolated and in need of guidance. In each encounter, he acted with care, mindful not to seek recognition, yet attentive to the needs before him. It was a delicate dance, balancing compassion action, and reflection, and he understood that the path to wisdom is measured not in heroic displays, but in the mindful, deliberate choices that shape life quietly and effectively. As he approached the valley, the fog thickened, obscuring paths and making navigation difficult. The city lay hidden below, and from the distant peaks Altheon could hear faint cries of distress, the mingling of fear and the urgency of survival. When he finally descended into the heart of the city, he found it besieged not by natural forces alone, but by greed and conflict among its leaders. Famine had weakened the people, disease spread silently, and disputes among those in power threatened to unravel what little stability remained. Altheon understood that his trial was twofold. He would need to guide the mortals with both skill and wisdom, and he would need to guard against the subtle temptation to act for recognition rather than necessity. He began by organizing efforts to provide food and medicine, working alongside the villagers to ensure that each person received what they needed. He mediated disputes between leaders, using careful reasoning and patience, avoiding the temptation to dominate or dictate. Every action was deliberate, tempered with thought and humility. Yet the deeper challenge lay in the unseen currents of human desire, the envy, ambition, and resentment that simmered beneath the surface. Altheon had faced storms and floods, but the storms of the human heart were far more complex, unpredictable, and dangerous. Here, his wisdom, patience, and understanding of hubris would be tested as severely as ever. Days passed, each filled with careful observation, thoughtful intervention, and quiet guidance. Altheon learned to listen more than he spoke, to act subtly rather than with force, to inspire rather than command. He observed the smallest gestures, the way a child shared food with another, the way an elder offered counsel to a leader, the unspoken support of neighbors in times of crisis. These moments revealed the profound truth that leadership tempered with humility can guide a community more effectively than fear, spectacle, or coercion. Yet the gods were not idle observers. Athena's presence lingered in the subtle sparks of insight Altheon felt, guiding his thoughts toward solutions that balanced compassion and prudence. Hermes whispered in the rustle of leaves, reminding him of the dangers of subtle pride, of the ways recognition can tempt even the humblest heart. And Zeus, the silent storm above, seemed to watch with measured patience, a reminder that the line between humility and hubris is thin, and that vigilance must never waver. One evening, as the city began to recover, Altheon stood upon a hill overlooking the rooftops, now illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns. The people moved with purpose, their fear replaced by cautious hope. He felt a quiet satisfaction, not pride, but the deep, grounding joy of having acted wisely, of having tempered ambition with care, of having served without expectation. And yet, even in this quiet moment, he sensed that his journey was far from complete. There were still lessons to be learned, trials to face, and moments when the shadow of hubris might return in subtle forms, testing both heart and mind. That night, Altheon slept beneath the stars, the valley silent except for the occasional whisper of wind through trees. He dreamed again, visions that were neither threatening nor frightening, but reflective. He saw paths he might yet take, choices that would demand patience, wisdom, and courage. He saw echoes of pride, subtle and persistent, reminding him that the journey of humility is ongoing, requiring vigilance, reflection, and mindful action. And as he awoke, he felt a quiet resolve settle within him, to continue, to face each trial with awareness, to act with wisdom, and to carry the lessons of hubris forward, not as a weight, but as a guiding light. As dawn broke over the valley, casting gold across rooftops and rivers, Altheon began to move again, leaving the city in capable hands. He walked with the quiet confidence of one who has faced danger, temptation, and the lingering shadows of pride, and emerged tempered, aware, and resolute. And in the distance, high upon the peaks, the wind seemed to carry the faintest echoes of divine presence, a reminder that even the humblest actions are observed, that the lessons of hubris are eternal, and that the path of wisdom, though never-ending, is illuminated for those who walk with care, courage, and reflection. Altheon left the valley at dawn, the city behind him now breathing again with cautious hope. The streets he had walked, once filled with fear and despair, now carried the gentle rhythm of life renewed. Children laughed softly in the courtyards, elders walked with steadier steps, and the leaders, once consumed by petty rivalries, now moved with tentative cooperation. Yet Altheon knew that even the most fragile peace could shatter, and the lessons of hubris are often tested most when victory seems assured. Pride can creep back quietly, unnoticed, and he remained vigilant, mindful that wisdom requires constant practice, not only reflection. He climbed higher into the mountains, where the air grew thinner and the sun's warmth struggled to penetrate the peaks. Here, the world seemed both grand and indifferent, the wind carving through jagged cliffs with relentless persistence, reminding him that nature is a force beyond mortal control. Each step demanded care, attention, and humility. The mountains whispered lessons in every rustle of leaves, every falling stone, every distant cry of an eagle circling above. Altheon walked slowly, aware that the gods' presence was never absent, their scrutiny subtle yet unyielding, and that every choice carried weight far beyond what mortals often perceive. One morning, as he traversed a narrow ridge overlooking a vast expanse of wilderness, Altheon saw something that caused his heart to tighten. A village lay below, but it was not like any he had seen before. Fires burned uncontrolled, smoke spiraled into the sky, and the wails of people struggling to survive echoed through the mountains. It was clear that this was no natural disaster alone. Discord, greed, and cruelty had combined with the chaos of nature to devastate the place. Altheon felt the familiar stirrings of fear and urgency, yet he also sensed that this trial was unlike any previous challenge. Here, the line between heroism and hubris would blur, and the choices he made could shape not only lives, but the measure of his own spirit. As he descended into the chaos, Altheon encountered a figure at the village's edge. The man was tall, with eyes that gleamed with cunning and pride, his presence commanding attention despite the disorder around him. He spoke with a voice that carried authority, yet beneath it lay manipulation and arrogance. "You seek to guide them, stranger?" the man asked. "Do you believe your wisdom can save lives that the strong claim for their own? Many have tried to teach humility, yet they all fail in the end. Why should your guidance succeed where others have faltered?" Altheon studied the man carefully, recognizing in him a reflection of the temptation that had once led to his own downfall. Pride unchecked can manifest not only in those who seek to surpass the gods, but in mortals who exploit weakness for control. Altheon's response was measured, calm. "Strength alone does not shape the world wisely," he said. "Wisdom, patience, and care guide action. If we act only for ourselves, we destroy what we hope to protect. But if we act with understanding, humility, and courage, even the smallest acts can create lasting change." The man laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Words are easy," he said, "but deeds reveal the heart. Can you act when every choice carries danger, when every step risks lives? Or will your caution paralyze you, leaving the weak to suffer while you debate morality?" Altheon felt the weight of the challenge pressing upon him. Here was a test, not of skill alone, not of courage alone, but of the total alignment of wisdom, humility, and action. A single misstep could amplify the suffering already present, while every decision had to balance urgency with care. Without hesitation, Altheon moved through the village, assessing the situation with careful observation. Buildings teetered on the brink of collapse, fires threatened to spread, and panicked villagers struggled to protect themselves and their possessions. Altheon's mind worked with precision, guiding people to safety, extinguishing flames with buckets and makeshift tools, and using fallen timbers to create barriers against further destruction. At the same time, he observed the man who had challenged him, noting the subtle ways in which fear and pride could manipulate others. He realized that this trial was not only physical, but moral, an intricate test of discernment, leadership, and self-control. Hours passed like days as Altheon worked tirelessly. Each decision demanded full attention, and each act carried consequences that reverberated through the village. He saw fear transform into hope, despair into determination, and chaos into order. But he also observed the subtle ways in which pride could re-emerge. Some villagers sought to take credit for actions they had not performed, while others doubted the wisdom of Altheon's guidance, tempted to assert their own dominance. In these moments, he felt the echoes of his own past hubris, the temptations that once led him to challenge the gods themselves, and he understood that true humility requires not only wisdom, but vigilance, restraint, and the courage to act even when recognition is uncertain. By nightfall, the fires were contained, the villagers were safe, and a tentative calm had returned. Altheon stood upon a ridge overlooking the city, breathing deeply, aware that this was but one stage of a much larger trial. He sensed the presence of the gods more clearly than ever before. Athena's eyes, bright and penetrating, seemed to measure his every action, rewarding insight and restraint. Hermes' laughter, soft and playful, reminded him to remain aware of subtle pride that might creep even in quiet moments. And Zeus, high and distant, radiated the silent authority of the storm, a reminder that even tempered humility is constantly observed and that mortal ambition, if misdirected, can still bring ruin. As he settled to rest beneath the stars, Altheon reflected on the trial he had just endured. He understood that hubris is not always dramatic or explosive. It can appear subtly in thought, in desire for recognition, in the quiet temptation to assert control over others. True wisdom, he realized, is the ability to act decisively and effectively while remaining mindful of the larger consequences, aware of both mortal limitations and divine oversight. The balance is delicate, requiring patience, courage, and the constant discipline of reflection. In his dreams that night, Altheon saw visions of the future. He saw paths stretching endlessly before him, some illuminated by light, others shrouded in shadow. He saw choices that demanded courage, wisdom, and humility, and in each, the echo of hubris threatened to tip the balance. Yet he also saw the possibility of guidance, of service, of life nurtured through careful, deliberate action. And he understood that the journey of the mortal heart is not measured in victories over others, nor in the defiance of the divine, but in the grace with which one navigates challenges, both internal and external, seeking to act rightly even in the presence of temptation. As dawn broke, Altheon began the next stage of his journey, leaving the village behind with quiet satisfaction in his heart. He walked through the mountains with deliberate steps, mindful of every thought and impulse, attuned to the subtle lessons hidden in the wind, the trees, and the flowing rivers. He understood that every encounter, every choice, every act of guidance carries consequences far beyond immediate perception. And he felt a growing sense of resolve that no matter how long or difficult the path, he would continue to walk with wisdom, humility, and vigilance, shaping his life not through arrogance, but through the careful alignment of action, reflection, and understanding. And so Altheon moved forward, carrying the lessons of the past trials, the mountain, the lightning, the floods, the landslides, the village chaos, like threads woven into the fabric of his being. He felt the subtle gaze of the gods upon him, not as threat or punishment, but as guidance, shaping his journey and testing the alignment of his heart. Each step forward was a testament to the power of humility tempered by courage, the quiet strength that emerges from reflection, and the eternal vigilance required to navigate the thin line between ambition and hubris. Altheon left the village at first light, the echoes of the previous day's trials still lingering in his mind. He moved with a measured step, his body weary, but his spirit alert, aware that the journey of wisdom is rarely linear. Each challenge he faced seemed to reveal deeper layers of the human heart: fear, desire, courage, and, always, the ever-present pull of hubris. Though he had learned restraint, he understood that wisdom is not a destination, but a practice, one that must be exercised with vigilance, humility, and reflection. As he descended the mountains, the landscape shifted, giving way to rolling hills and wide valleys dotted with vineyards and small towns. The air was warmer here, fragrant with wildflowers and the faint scent of distant forests. Altheon observed the people he passed with keen attention. Farmers tilled their fields, children ran through the streets laughing, and traders moved goods along dusty paths. In each action he saw subtle lessons: the patience of labor, the joy of shared effort, and the quiet resilience of those who endure life without seeking recognition. These were lessons that the gods seemed eager for him to notice, reminders that humility is not merely avoidance of pride, but the ability to see greatness in the ordinary, to honor effort without spectacle. One afternoon, Altheon encountered a small town in turmoil. The river that ran through it had overflowed, flooding homes and fields, leaving the townspeople struggling to save what they could. At first glance, the problem seemed simple: divert the water, rebuild the damaged areas, guide the people to safety. But Altheon quickly realized that the crisis was compounded by human failings, resentment between neighbors, disputes over property, and leaders who sought to assert dominance rather than cooperate. Here again, he saw that hubris is not always obvious. It can appear quietly, hidden in thought, in ambition, in the subtle ways humans assert themselves over one another. Altheon set to work, not commanding but guiding. He showed the villagers how to construct temporary barriers, how to redirect water without destroying the fields, and how to organize efforts to protect the most vulnerable. He mediated disputes, encouraging dialogue and cooperation rather than dominance. And throughout it all, he reminded himself that true wisdom is measured not in the control one exerts over others, but in the ability to inspire collaboration, to balance urgency with care, and to act decisively without letting ego dictate choices. As night fell, Altheon made his way to a hill overlooking the town. The lanterns reflected in the calm waters of the river, now partially redirected, casting a gentle glow over the recovering landscape. He felt a quiet satisfaction, yet he knew that this was not the end of the trial. The gods rarely allow lessons to conclude without deeper testing, and Altheon sensed that the greatest challenge yet awaited him. His thoughts drifted to the past, the mountain, the lightning, the storms, and the villages he had saved. Each experience had tempered him, yet he knew that the subtle echo of pride, the quiet desire for recognition, could still influence his choices. Vigilance was required at every moment. As he contemplated the night sky, a figure appeared from the shadows, a woman, her presence serene and commanding. She wore flowing robes that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, and her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. Altheon recognized her at once, Athena, goddess of wisdom, her presence both reassuring and imposing. "Altheon," she said, her voice like the rustle of leaves and the ringing of distant bells. "You have acted with wisdom, patience, and humility, yet your journey is not complete. The final trial awaits, a challenge that will confront the heart of pride, the essence of hubris itself. You must face it willingly, with courage and clarity, for the gods do not test only the body or the mind, but the alignment of the mortal spirit." Altheon bowed his head, feeling the weight of her presence. "I am ready," he said, his voice steady, "to face whatever trial you set before me. I understand that true wisdom requires vigilance, courage, and humility. I will act not for glory, but for understanding, for guidance, and for the greater good." Athena's gaze lingered on him, bright and piercing, and then she nodded. "Follow the river north," she instructed, "to the ruins of an ancient city. There you will confront not only danger, but the consequences of pride unchecked. The echoes of hubris resonate through history. You must navigate them with care, insight, and compassion." The journey northward took several days, through forests thick with ancient trees and across plains dotted with wildflowers and grazing animals. Along the way, Altheon encountered signs of the subtle consequences of pride: abandoned villages, fields ruined by greed, and people worn down by conflict born of arrogance. He understood that hubris leaves scars not only on the individual but on entire communities, and that the lessons of humility must be applied broadly, with patience and care. Finally, he reached the ruins, a city once magnificent now reduced to crumbling stone and overgrown gardens. The air was heavy with the echoes of past ambition and the consequences of pride, and Altheon felt a shiver pass through him. The remnants of statues and temples bore silent witness to those who had sought to rival the gods, to build beyond mortal measure, and had failed. It was a place of warning, a monument to the delicate balance between ambition and humility. As he walked through the ruins, Altheon sensed movement among the shadows. Figures emerged, spirits of those who had succumbed to pride, their forms flickering like smoke and fire. They moved with purpose, their eyes glowing with accusation and longing. "You seek wisdom," one spirit said, voice echoing like wind through empty halls. "Do you believe you can act without the pride that destroyed us? Do you think humility can guide a mortal through the consequences of ambition untempered?" Altheon took a deep breath, steadying himself. He understood that this was the culmination of all he had learned, a confrontation not of body, but of spirit. He spoke calmly, his voice carrying the weight of experience and reflection. "I do not act to rival the gods, nor to assert my will over others. I act with awareness, with care, and with the understanding that every choice carries consequences. Pride may linger, but it does not control me. I will act wisely, with humility, and I will learn from every moment." The spirits circled him, their forms swirling like mist. Some glowed with anger, others with sorrow, yet all seemed to test his resolve. Altheon felt the echoes of his own past hubris, the lingering desire to prove himself, to assert control, to rise above mortal limitation. But he did not falter. He remembered the mountains, the storms, the villages, and the lessons learned in each encounter. He felt the guiding presence of Athena, the subtle whispers of Hermes, and the silent authority of Zeus. With every breath, he anchored himself in wisdom, humility, and reflection. Hours passed in the ruins, the spirits testing, observing, and challenging him. Altheon moved with deliberate care, addressing each situation with insight, balancing action with restraint. He helped a spirit trapped in anger find peace, guided another burdened by regret toward understanding, and in each encounter he recognized the subtle ways hubris can influence thought and action. By sunrise, the spirits had begun to dissipate, their forms dissolving into the morning light. They left behind a sense of calm, a quiet affirmation that Altheon had passed the trial, not through force or dominance, but through the careful alignment of wisdom, courage, and humility. Exhausted, yet resolute, Altheon emerged from the ruins as the first rays of the sun illuminated the valley below. The city, though in ruins, now seemed alive with a quiet energy, as if the lessons of the past had been acknowledged and transformed. Altheon understood that hubris leaves echoes across time, but that vigilance, reflection, and deliberate action can counteract its influence. He felt the presence of the gods one last time, their approval subtle but unmistakable, a reminder that the alignment of mortal action and divine observation is the true measure of wisdom. And so, Altheon continued his journey carrying the echoes of trials, reflection, and lessons learned. Each step forward was a testament to the quiet power of humility, the vigilance required to temper ambition, and the enduring truth that wisdom is not a destination, but a lifelong practice. He knew the road ahead would hold further challenges, yet he faced it with a heart tempered by experience, guided by insight, and anchored in the understanding that hubris, though ever present, can be met and overcome with patience, courage, and mindful action. Altheon left the ruins of the ancient city behind, the echoes of the spirit still lingering in his mind. He walked with careful steps along a narrow path carved into the side of the mountains, each stone beneath his feet a reminder of the fragile balance between mortal effort and the forces that shape the world. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, painting the peaks in gold and crimson, and Altheon felt a sense of calm tempered by anticipation. He knew that the final trial of his journey awaited, a challenge not of simple skill or courage, but of the very essence of his character, a confrontation with the enduring shadow of hubris that dwells in every mortal heart. As he ascended higher, the air grew thin, crisp, and cold. Snow clung to jagged cliffs, and the wind howled through narrow passes like a restless spirit. Each step required vigilance, not only to maintain balance, but to keep his mind steady. Here, in this realm between earth and sky, Altheon felt the god's presence more keenly than ever. Athena's wisdom seemed to guide the patterns in the rocks, Hermes' whispers stirred in the wind, and Zeus' authority resonated in the distant rumble of thunder. The mountains themselves seemed alive, testing his resolve, observing his heart, reminding him that hubris is subtle, persistent, and ever-present. Midday came, and Altheon reached a plateau overlooking a vast valley blanketed in mist. In the distance, a city lay hidden, its towers barely visible through the fog. The air carried a strange energy, a mixture of anticipation, fear, and the weight of history. He sensed immediately that this place was central to his ultimate trial, a crucible in which all he had learned would be tested to the fullest. As he descended into the valley, he saw the signs of human ambition stretched too far, buildings half collapsed from overreach, streets crowded with those desperate for power and recognition, and individuals whose pride had blinded them to the needs of others. This city was the embodiment of hubris, a living testament to the consequences of unchecked desire. Altheon approached the city gates, which were cracked and worn, and was met by a figure unlike any he had encountered before. The man was tall and imposing, adorned in garments that gleamed like sunlight on water, yet his eyes burned with arrogance. "You dare enter this place, stranger?" he asked. "Do you not see the ruin that ambition alone has wrought? Many have come to teach humility here, and all have failed. Why should your wisdom prevail where others have perished? Altheon considered the question carefully. "I do not seek to dominate, to impress, or to command. I seek only to act with understanding, patience, and care, to guide those willing to listen, and to temper ambition with wisdom. Hubris is a danger not only to those who wield it, but to those who fail to recognize it. My task is to illuminate, to balance, to act where necessary, without allowing pride to dictate my actions." The man's gaze sharpened, and he laughed, a sound that carried both challenge and malice. "Words are easy," he said, "but can you act when every choice demands sacrifice, when every step risks not only your life but the lives of those you seek to protect?" Altheon felt the weight of the challenge pressing upon him. This was no ordinary test. It was a trial of discernment, courage, and moral clarity. He understood that the true measure of humility is revealed in action, particularly when consequences are immediate, complex, and far-reaching. He entered the city cautiously, observing the chaos. Fires smoldered in abandoned buildings, floods from broken aqueducts ran through the streets, and disputes erupted among those who had survived the ruin. Every action he took had to be deliberate, measured, and guided by the lessons he had learned on his journey. He began by organizing the survivors, teaching them how to construct temporary barriers, redistribute resources, and care for the wounded. He mediated disputes with patience, reminding those who quarreled that survival requires cooperation, not dominance. And as he acted, he felt the subtle whispers of hubris, tempting him to assert authority, to act swiftly for recognition rather than necessity. He resisted these impulses, grounding himself in humility and reflection, aware that the alignment of intention and action is the true test of wisdom. As the hours passed, Altheon confronted challenges more complex than any before. He faced natural dangers, the unstable structures, raging floods and sudden fires, and human obstacles, from leaders unwilling to cede power to desperate individuals driven by fear and pride. Every decision carried weight, and every misstep could amplify suffering. He moved with precision, balancing the urgent needs of the present with the long-term restoration of order. It was a dance of careful calculation and empathy, the kind of trial that tests not only skill, but the heart itself. By nightfall, the city began to stabilize. The fires were contained, the floodwaters redirected, and the people moved with cautious coordination. Yet Altheon sensed that this was not the end. In the central plaza, a towering figure emerged from the shadows, a man whose form radiated power, arrogance, and a subtle echo of the divine. His presence seemed to warp the very air, and Altheon realized that this was the final test, a confrontation not of brute strength, but of moral clarity, wisdom, and the capacity to act without succumbing to pride. The figure spoke, voice resonating like rolling thunder. "Altheon," he said, "you have guided, protected, and instructed, but humility is fragile. The desire for recognition can still taint your actions. Will you act now for the good of others, or will the subtle lure of pride, of admiration, of glory, guide your hand?" Altheon met the gaze steadily. He felt the pull of past temptations, the echo of youthful ambition, yet he also felt the quiet strength of experience, the tempered insight of trials endured, the steady rhythm of reflection and vigilance. "I act for understanding, for guidance, for those in need," he said, "not for recognition, not for glory. Pride may linger, but it does not control me. My purpose is to act wisely and with humility, in alignment with what is right." The final trial began. The towering figure challenged Altheon in a series of tasks that tested every lesson he had learned, guiding panicked people to safety, extinguishing fires without endangering others, mediating disputes among those blinded by fear and desire, and navigating treacherous terrain to protect the vulnerable. Each moment demanded precision, patience, and moral clarity. Altheon acted decisively, yet with reflection, aware that the alignment of intention and action is the true measure of virtue. Hours stretched into an endless night as the trial pressed him to his limits. He felt exhaustion gnaw at his body and the subtle tug of ego attempt to assert itself. Yet he maintained focus, grounding himself in the lessons of his journey, the mountain and the lightning, the floods and landslides, the villages he had saved, and the quiet guidance of the gods. With every decision, he balanced urgency with care, action with reflection, and courage with humility. Finally, as dawn broke, the figure observed silently and then began to dissipate into light, leaving behind a quiet affirmation of Altheon's success. The city, though scarred, stood stabilized, the people moved with purpose, not fear, and the echoes of hubris that had haunted the ruins were tempered by guidance, cooperation, and understanding. Altheon felt the presence of the gods, subtle and unwavering, Athena's wisdom, Hermes' playful reminders, Zeus's silent authority, all acknowledging that the trial had been met not with force, but with insight, patience, and humility. Altheon understood then that the journey was not simply about acts of heroism or the avoidance of mistakes. It was about vigilance, reflection, and the constant alignment of intention and action. Hubris, he realized, is never fully absent, yet it can be met, balanced, and subdued through wisdom, humility, and moral clarity. The greatest victories are those of understanding, compassion, and measured action, quiet triumphs that shape not only the self, but the world around it. As he left the city, the sun casting gold upon the valleys below, Altheon felt the weight of his journey settling into a deep, abiding calm. The trials, the tests, the confrontations with pride and the divine, they had shaped him, tempered him, and revealed the essence of humility. He walked forward with steady resolve, aware that the road ahead would hold further lessons, but confident that he now possessed the insight, courage, and vigilance to face them with grace. And in the quiet of the mountains, as the wind whispered through the peaks and the stars lingered faintly in the fading night, Altheon understood the eternal truth. That hubris, though persistent, can be met with reflection, tempered by wisdom, and overcome by the patient, deliberate, and humble actions of a vigilant heart. Altheon left the city behind, the rising sun painting the valley in shades of gold and crimson. The trials he had endured, the mountains climbed, the villages saved, and the encounters with both human and divine tests had shaped him profoundly. He walked with steady steps, each movement deliberate, aware that the journey toward true wisdom is never complete, yet feeling a deep sense of fulfillment in having faced the consequences of hubris and learned its lessons fully. The wind carried whispers of the gods, subtle and persistent, a gentle reminder that observation and guidance extend far beyond mortal perception. As he traversed a narrow path along the mountainside, he reflected on the trials that had marked his path. Each challenge had been more than a physical test. Each had been a mirror to his own heart. The mountain storms, the raging rivers, the landslides, and the villages he saved, they were all lessons in humility, patience, and moral clarity. The echoes of hubris, persistent and subtle, had tested him at every turn, seeking to draw him back into pride, yet he had learned to recognize them, to resist them, and to act with purpose, guided by wisdom rather than desire for recognition. By midday, Altheon arrived at a plateau overlooking a serene lake, its waters still and reflective like polished glass. Here, the quiet of nature offered a rare pause, a moment to reflect deeply upon the journey and its meaning. He knelt at the edge of the water, gazing into its depths, and saw visions of the past trials replayed before him, the lightning that had tested his courage, the village floods that demanded measured action, the ruins where the spirits of hubris whispered their warnings. In each reflection, he observed not only the dangers of pride, but the subtle triumph of humility, patience, and wisdom. It was here, in the stillness of the lake and the hush of the surrounding mountains, that Athena appeared once more. Her presence radiated calm authority, her eyes glowing with the brilliance of insight and understanding. "Altheon," she said, her voice soft yet commanding, "you have endured trials that tested your courage, your patience, and the clarity of your heart. You have acted with wisdom and humility, guiding those in need, mediating conflict, and confronting the subtle pull of pride within yourself. The gods have observed your journey, and the lessons you have learned are now a living testament to the power of reflection, restraint, and deliberate action." Altheon rose, bowing respectfully. "I have learned that pride is a constant companion, subtle and persistent, and that wisdom requires vigilance, reflection, and measured action," he replied. "I understand that the consequences of hubris reach far beyond the individual, touching communities, nature, and the very fabric of life. My journey has taught me to act not for glory or recognition, but for understanding, guidance, and the preservation of balance." Athena's gaze lingered on him, and then she smiled, a quiet, approving expression. "You have understood what few mortals do. That humility is not weakness, but strength tempered by insight. And that the alignment of intention and action is the truest measure of virtue. You have faced the consequences of hubris and emerged not unscathed, but wiser, tempered, and steadfast." As Athena faded into the sunlight, Altheon felt a profound calm settle over him. The trials, the villages, the mountains, and the ruins, they were no longer burdens, but lessons integrated into the very core of his being. He understood now that the journey of wisdom is not about avoiding mistakes, nor about never facing danger, but about learning from every challenge, observing one's own heart, and acting with courage, clarity, and humility in every situation. Hubris may linger in every mortal heart, but its influence can be balanced, guided, and transformed through reflection, vigilance, and deliberate choice. Altheon continued along the plateau, descending toward the valley below, where forests stretched in quiet majesty and rivers flowed like ribbons of silver. Along the way, he observed life in its intricate patterns, a bird building a nest with careful precision, children playing with joy yet mindful of one another, villagers tending their fields with patience and care. In these simple acts he saw the subtle reflections of divine guidance and human responsibility, the delicate balance between ambition and humility, and the quiet power of acts performed with understanding and compassion. As dusk fell, painting the skies in shades of violet and amber, Altheon reached the edge of a cliff overlooking the endless horizon. He stood in silence, contemplating the journey he had undertaken, the trials he had faced, and the lessons that would continue to guide him. Pride had tested him in countless forms, yet he had learned to recognize it, to temper it, and to act without allowing it to dictate his choices. He understood that humility is not passive, but an active engagement with life, a deliberate alignment of intention, action, and reflection that shapes both the self and the world. The winds stirred, carrying faint whispers of Zeus, Athena, and Hermes, the gods who had observed and guided him throughout his journey. Their presence was subtle, yet profound, a reminder that mortal life is entwined with forces greater than oneself, and that every action carries consequences far beyond immediate perception. Altheon bowed his head in gratitude, feeling a deep connection to both the mortal and divine, aware that his journey had transformed him not only in knowledge, but in spirit. As night fell, the stars emerged, twinkling softly in the vast expanse above. Altheon lay upon the soft grass, gazing upward, and felt a quiet joy settle in his heart. The trials of hubris, the lessons of humility, and the alignment of intention and action were no longer abstract ideas. They were lived experiences woven into the very fabric of his being. He understood that life would continue to present challenges, that the subtle pull of pride would always linger, but he also knew that he now possessed the insight, patience, and courage to navigate them with wisdom and clarity. In the stillness of the night, Altheon whispered a prayer, not for power, not for recognition, not for glory, but for continued vigilance, for clarity of heart, and for the strength to act rightly in every moment yet to come. And as he spoke, the stars shimmered faintly, as if acknowledging the depth of his understanding, the transformation of his spirit, and the journey he had completed. He understood that the path of wisdom is never-ending, yet each step, guided by humility, reflection, and deliberate action, brings the mortal heart closer to understanding, balance, and grace. Altheon rose at dawn, feeling the quiet strength of one tempered by trials, guided by reflection, and aligned with the truths of life. He walked forward into the morning light, carrying the lessons of hubris and humility with him, ready to act with wisdom in every choice, to guide, to serve, and to live in accordance with the balance he had discovered. The mountains, the villages, the cities, the ruins, they were all witnesses, not only to his journey but to the enduring lesson that hubris, though ever present, can be met, balanced, and subdued through vigilance, reflection, and the deliberate, humble action of a mindful heart. And so, Altheon's journey continued, not in search of glory, but in pursuit of understanding, wisdom, and the quiet, enduring power of humility. The lessons of hubris and its consequences were etched into his very being, a compass guiding every step, every choice, every act. He had faced the shadows of pride, embraced the challenges of the mortal and divine, and emerged tempered, aware, and steadfast. In the endless expanse of mountains, rivers, forests, and cities, he moved forward, a living testament to the transformative power of humility, reflection, and deliberate, mindful action, the true measure of wisdom in a world watched by gods and shaped by the choices of mortals.